I got some great memories from the Firecracker 400. The Firecracker 400 in 1987 or any time in the 80s was the one race that I wanted to go to. You know, I was going to a lot of races, but that was the most important because they had an off weekend before the race. So we were at the beach, playing in the sand, swimming in the pool at the hotel, and then we were going to a racetrack, and I was going to be able to run all over that place and do anything I wanted with my friends. And so I love Daytona. Those are my earliest memories of going to Daytona, and I've loved it ever since. It's just my favorite race to go to, whether it's in February or whether it's in the summer. And I remember, I think in 86 or 87, Dad blew a motor going into turn 1, nosed it into the wall with the right front. I'm watching in the infield and he comes sliding by against the wall, just killed the right front of the car. It caused a late yellow. I think Dave Marcus was gonna win the race. He had a really good car, believe it or not. He was driving that Lifebuoy car. I think Dave's gonna win the race, and I might have 86 and 87 confused here, but I remember Kenny Schrader flipping over on the front straightaway. It was a late race. A couple guys stayed out on old tires. Some guys get new tires. Dave is getting overrun. He's not gonna win, but he's sliding around out there trying to finish as good as he can. Schrader gets clipped in the right rear coming through the trioval and goes airborne upside down. The Firecracker, I remember going there in 90, I believe, when they had the giant wreck on the front straightaway. Coming down the front straightaway, Richard Petty, Greg Sachs, and somebody else, Derek Cope maybe? And I think Greg Sachs is in the middle, and they're coming into the trioval, and he's getting loose, and he's bouncing off of one into the other, and he finally spins it around, and the whole field crashed. I was in the pits near the end of pit road. It was really hot, always was. They started the race at 10 o'clock in the morning because the temperature was a little bit better, and so we were done and on the beach by 2 o'clock. And so, but anyways, big giant crash. And there was this back marker. I don't even remember his name. I don't even know that he ran more than a handful of races, but he comes flying in there in the last minute and just T-bones everybody. It was a wild wreck. And then when everything got cleaned up, Dad and Bobby Hillen in the Snickers Buick, and I believe Jake Elder might have been the crew chief. Maybe it was Harry Hyde, but it might have been Jake Elder. One of those two was crew chief in that car. Dad, Bobby Hillen. There was only 2 left. Raced all day long, and Dad ended up winning the race. I loved going to Daytona in the summer. That off weekend beforehand allowed all the industry to go in a little early. Everybody stayed in the hotels. Nobody had buses, so you'd go to the hotel, and there'd be all these drivers hanging out around the pool, crew chiefs, drivers. Everybody's bench racing, telling stories. You'd walking in and out of the lobby, running down to get candy out of the candy machine or something, and see drivers going to dinner with their wives, and just everybody was there, you know. Everybody was in the hotel, everybody was on the strip, right in the middle, mingling with the fans. It was incredible, way different than it is today. So yeah, you guys picking the Firecracker 400, y'all picked a good one. You locked me in right away for as long as y'all keep having this event. I'm gonna keep trying to make it.
You know, if I go back to the mid and late 80s, in a Cup car, they were a handful. They were a handful. Even though we had power steering, it was more power assist. It wasn't, I wouldn't even call it that in some cases. I drove for Leonard Wood, and he believed that power steering took 10 or 15 horsepower away. So a lot of times still on the super speedways, we didn't run power steering. We still ran a manual box.
And the biggest thing back then with those cars, it was an absolute challenge to get your car where your driver could run wide open around that 2.5 mile racetrack. The cars did not have a lot of downforce. And when we would go in the wind tunnel, we kind of would put blinders on and not even worry about downforce. We just would try to get the drag just as low as we could to help the speed of the race car. That would pay dividends in qualifying, but a lot of times we would end up paying the price in the race.
As far as adjusting for the Firecracker 400, because it was so extremely hot and humid, the race always started real early down there was one thing. We'd get up at 3 in the morning to get into the garage, to get in there. I think we'd be racing by 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. It did make for a good day because usually we were back on the beach by 2 or 3. So family time was good then.
We finally got to the point where we were taking like a Michigan car to Daytona in July when it was so hot, it was so slick, and there was no grip, and the car didn't have any downforce. I just remember it just being a handful.
I have a lot of memories of the Monte Carlos and Thunderbirds from around 1987, and 1987 was a really, really good year for Dad, won a lot of races.
Back in the early 80s when I worked with Dale Sr., you know, he was one tough customer. That's why they had to have him wear Wranglers and stuff. But, you know, what I remember the most about Dale was we were in Daytona testing and getting ready for these events, getting ready for qualifying. And, you know, he was one of them guys like, yeah, we'll take some more spoiler off, you know, okay, we'll go out, run a little faster. Okay, let's lay it down a little bit. Okay, go out, we'll go a little faster. He said, Doug, just take the spoiler off. And we did. And here we go, we left pit road. He takes off, and he takes off going through the gears, you know, and he gets over coming out of turn 2. I think he just pulls back into high gear, and he's going, and the wheels started spinning, and he just slowed right down. He comes back onto pit road. He said, Doug, you better put that back on.
The 1987 cars were cars that you could be aggressive with. I mean, the racing back then was tough, and the drivers were rough with each other. It was just a really wild time, you know. And so, you know, that's kind of around the time where I started really tuning in and understanding what NASCAR was, what my dad did, and what he was trying to accomplish every single week.
From an aero standpoint, the two biggest tools that you had that you could adjust on at the track, which is sacred ground now, you can't even touch it, and that's the angle of the rear spoiler, and then pretty much how wide or how narrow you put the front fenders. Obviously, the more you pulled the front fenders in, the more it would lower the drag of the car. The more you'd lay that rear spoiler back, it would lower the drag of the car. But that then could be a handful in the race itself. I remember many a pit stop going out there and bumping that rear spoiler up because he said, I can't drive this thing, I'm so loose, especially in traffic.
From a driver's perspective, working with a crew chief and working on a car was totally different. If we come to 86, 87, 88, to that period of time, the aero horse was just leaving the barn, okay? Aero was a big part of it, but it was not the major part. Mechanical grip, that's what you look for. We're gonna change springs, we're gonna change shocks. It's not, you know, we're gonna tweak this, we're gonna tweak that. We're gonna change. We're gonna go from a 2,800-pound right front spring to a 3,800-pound right front spring. We're gonna put a 600-pound right rear in it, or we're gonna put a 400 right rear in it. And the 4th of July race, the Firecracker 400, was always about handling.
People always ask me about what kind of memories I have and what drivers I've worked with and all that. Well, Darrell Waltrip always comes to mind as being that guy. And I had a great time when I worked for Junior Johnson. It was like 4 years back and forth working with Darrell and all that up there. And back in the day, when we were at Junior Johnson's, if we showed up at the racetrack, we had a shot to win. And in fact, the one year when we were there, it was just like one of those years that everything clicked. Myself, Mike Hill, Jeff Hammond, we were all there together. I had a great time. We still stay in contact even to this day, talking about all those good times we had. But we won 13 races in 1 year. And that is a great feeling.
When I think about the years around the 80s, 87 just stands out. You've got the Winston, which was one of the all-time greatest races, just so much drama, action, anger, beating and banging. there was a good amount of that throughout the entire season. So, you know, Dad ends up winning the championship that year. He ended up winning back-to-back championships in '86 and '87. So we're riding a high as a family, and I'm going to the racetrack and knowing that Dad's going to run great. I'm hanging out with all my friends. I've got, you know, friends of you know, kids of other drivers and crew chiefs, daughters and sons, and we just all kind of hung out together. And Dad was doing great, so I knew I was going to have a great time at the track with my friends, goofing off and running around in the garage area and climbing all over race cars, and then we was going to watch Dad do great in the race. So it was a time of my life, to be honest with you.
Yeah, one of the highlights for me in 1987 was I was working at Daytona with Buddy Baker. I worked the whole season with him then, but 1987, we started 9th. We were coming down to the end. We felt like we were in the lead, and lo and behold, we finished 2nd. It was a controversial type thing. Even the TV said that Buddy Baker wins, and we all thought we won, and the only thing was Bobby Allison beat us to victory lane. Can I tell you exactly what happened right now? No. We all felt like he was a lap down, but we really didn't know how he got it back. All I know is we still finished 2nd, even when I look on racing references today.
And I also remember some late race cautions, and we would get a pit stop late in the race, put 4 fresh tires on, and I'd jump out there across that wall and beat that spoiler down just a little bit because I knew the fresh tires would carry us for a little bit. But that was probably the biggest tools from an aero standpoint, was the front fenders, but especially that rear spoiler.
Where the Daytona 500 was always about speed. You could take a car down there and run the same car in February that you came back with in July, and it was a totally different animal, totally different beast. You wanted that car to be able to drive all day long as good as it could. And listen, these laps weren't wide open. These laps were feathering, getting into the corner, going back to the gas, feathering again, going back to the gas. We had tires that were harder than the asphalt. So what you wanted as much as you could was that mechanical grip. So as I would talk to Eddie Wood or Leonard Wood and those guys at that time, it was all about caster and camber settings, and we would change the caster a little bit or change the camber a little bit. We lived by tire temps. We lived by that tire sheet. Whatever that tire sheet told us, that's what we did. If it showed that it was 10 degrees loose, if I didn't feel it, they believed it was 10 degrees loose. That's what we did. If it showed that it was 10 or 15 tight, they believed it. We tried to get as neutral as we could. And really, as fuel ran out, these cars, drastic change as fuel ran out of these cars. So it was a handful from the time you started, but the relationship and working with a crew chief to get that mechanical grip was just as intense at Daytona as it would be at Martinsville, as it would be in Bristol, as it would be some of those other places. And maybe more so, because the Firecracker 400 was a huge race. To win at Daytona in the summertime was a big thing.
So cheating is when you get caught. If you don't get caught, it's not cheating, right? Okay. Yeah, I mean, you know, I feel like this far removed, I don't have any problem sharing anything. You know, with the 26 car, the Quaker State car, our engines did not make the horsepower that we needed to really be competitive at Daytona and Talladega. I mean, we were okay, and we could figure out things to do to qualify well, but we just didn't have the horsepower to keep up with Robert Yates, Richard Childress Racing, Morgan McClure. So honestly, we did things outside the rule book just to really get inside the top 10, top 15, maybe even the top 20. When I went to Robert Yates Racing, that was a whole nother story now. With the horsepower that Robert and Doug Yates was making, we would do things to be able to hopefully sit on the pole. We would do things to hopefully maybe help win the race. But yeah, I mean, we did a lot of things. We knew anything we could do to get air into the intake manifold, that was like instant horsepower. And we did things to the air cleaner itself. I've saturated many an air cleaner element with propylene oxide, and put it on there just before qualifying. That way it would suck it out of the air cleaner during the qualifying run, and then once the qualifying lap was over, propylene oxide pretty much would be gone.
Yeah, I think that car was a short track car that raced. It won the first race on radial tires, I believe, in 1988 or 89. It was still a Monte Carlo, still a Monte Carlo today. I don't know about the car's history before that. I'm sure it won a handful of short track races because Daddy won a lot of races in 86 and 87. But I know the final race that it won, or one of its final races, was that first race on radial tires at North Wilkesboro. And so that was, it's a good car. It's got a lot of great, it's probably got a dozen wins, maybe. And that's why they kept it, obviously, because it was so successful, and that's why it sits down there at the Hall of Fame. There's a Bill Elliott Ford that sits in the Hall of Fame at Dawsonville, and they went down there to scan that car, and it's in Bill's possession. So both of those cars are legit scans of legit race-winning cars from both of those two drivers, right? When we announced the release of this car, we had the Bill Elliott car and the Dale Earnhardt car, and we were kind of using their likeness to promote it all. And there wasn't no fibbing or twisting of the truth behind the real origins of those cars that were scanned. Never expected iRacing to, create these cars. They typically, don't do a lot of vintage stuff, historical stuff, so I wouldn't have picked any other year. When they came down to it, it wasn't my decision on what year they chose and what cars they went to scan, but they picked the year I would have picked. We had a fun sort of reveal and release of those cars. We had the North Wilkesboro scan and a great video that I debuted on my Twitch channel. I'm getting into Twitch and all that, so it was just a really fun time. And I drove the cars a bit, and I wasn't, I never raced in 1987, so I wasn't sure about how the cars should feel, but I wasn't really sure they were right, and I was like, man, these things are a handful. Maybe they'll dial them in with setups and so forth. And the car has a fixed official series, and so the setups, are, you can basically make the car drive any way you want. And so over time, I still, the cars weren't really changing much. They were a handful, not comfortable. I didn't think they were right. I got hired as an employee with iRacing, and now I've helped them for years, just offering up thoughts and ideas and any kind of information I could get them, cars to scan, engine numbers, downforce numbers, anything that I could possibly help them with, I tried to provide. And I didn't have that kind of leverage to say, hey, this car's wrong, here, I'm gonna fix it. Let me fix it, right? And but when I got hired, they said, hey, here's you've got that leverage, and get involved anywhere you want. So I noticed that Bobby Labonte's gotten a lot more active on the service, and I teed him up and I said, hey Bobby, what do you think about this car? Can you drive it? He drove it. He said, I'll spend a couple days. He drove a lot of different tracks. He watched a lot of old races from 1987, in-car footage, like he really dove in. I was really impressed. And he come back to me and he had the exact same opinion of the car. He said, it doesn't feel right. Something about it's off. And so I started to talk to some crew chiefs, because I've had a bunch of these guys on the Dale Jr. download, and I've got their contacts. We just had a great conversation with Andy Petrie a couple weeks ago. I call him up and he's like, here's the downforce numbers that we would have had around then. And he gave me a bunch of different information. I called Gary Nelson, who I've been in touch with for years, who was a crew chief for Bobby Allison and a bunch of other greats in that time frame, and he gave me similar information. I reached out to Dale Jarrett, Kyle Petty, Kirk Shelmerdine, a handful of other guys. They all gave me numbers for this car that were really close, within 10 or 20 counts, and they were nothing like what was in the sim on the member side. On the member side in the sim, the downforce numbers for the front and the rear of the car were way down. And so basically we got, we were driving a car that was kind of more akin to what you might drive in 1977, 1980, around that time frame. By 1987, they gained a ton of downforce. For those times, it was a lot. I got with Eric Hudek and some of the engineers with iRacing, and we just on the Alpha side, we just plugged this stuff in. He gave me some files and said, test this out and see what it feels like. I drove it. I'm like, whoa! Now this seems like when I'm watching an in-car camera of a guy driving a NASCAR stock car, even if I never raced that car, just by watching that camera, I get a good sense of what kind of grip he's dealing with, how loose or tight the car is, and how much he can push it before he starts to slip. So I'm like, man, this really feels like what I see. And watching the cars slide through the corner in real life or on a vintage, on an old race, this is really close to what I think they feel like. So, we kept on plugging away at it. I got some setup information, some really good setup stuff. I got basically corner weights for like 8 different racetracks. And so what I would do with that information is basically I'd get the nose weight, I'd get the cross, and I'd basically kind of plug that in to the setups that we had in the sim and see how the car drove. And we had some rough ideas on what they might run for right front spring, rear springs, what kind of shock compression and rebound settings they would run on each corner of the car and all that stuff. We weren't really pretty basic. And but it was good information. We got tire stagger information from Gary Nelson and Petrie, and that pretty much all lined up with together. Their information was similar. It was different again than what we had plugged into the data on the member side. And so when we plugged all that in, I was like, oh, I hope this thing drives okay. What if it just breaks the car? It drove great, really good, way better. And so I was eager to check a few final boxes and get this out to the members. This car, in my opinion, should be a really popular car that a lot of people on the site love to get involved in and love to enjoy. And it's not reached its potential, in my opinion. And so I feel like that we're on our way. There's still more to do. We've got some engine numbers yet it's some small differences on horsepower versus torque with what we have on members. Nothing that's going to be completely crazy. You might not even really need to change the gear, but a click or two to get there. But I want it just right, So I got some engine numbers. I got dyno sheets from 1987 for the Rockingham car from RCR. I called him up, and Danny Lawrence that works there, I said, Danny, do y'all have any information from 1987? He said, yeah, we got it. I'll print it out. I'll email it to you. Sure enough, he prints me out a sheet, and Arlo torque and power numbers for every 100 RPMs all the way down to 8100. And so we also learned that the car had a little bit different rev chip than what we have on members. So there's still a lot of little things that need to be cleaned up to where we basically give everyone on the service the real experience. So I'm thrilled with the direction the cars went. The Firecracker 400 event that Landon and Parker put together is the best way to showcase these changes and say, hey, everybody, check this car out. We made some big improvements, and hopefully everybody loves it. The car drives so good at Charlotte, Michigan, even the short tracks. I mean, it's just a fun car. We came in pretty conservative with all the fixed setups for the series this season. Those will improve as we sort of get a better understanding of how to get the car to turn and do everything everybody wants, because all the members all want something different in how the car drives. Some guys think the setup might be way too tight. Another guy might have a different opinion and like it, depending on how they drive the car. But it's been fun, and I think this car finally might be able to really get to where it needs to be for people in the service to really appreciate it and get some big support. So it was a lot of fun talking to those real crew chiefs and heroes and guys that I've looked up to. And even when I was communicating with them, they really didn't know why I was trying to get this information. They don't know what I was doing with it, but they were eager to share it. They were calling me, texting me, emailing me more and more and more information, and I just kept passing that to to the iRacing staff and engineers, and kept testing the data that they were giving me back and driving the car, and so it's been fun, and I'm much more happy about this car than the previous physics that we've been using for about a year now. I think a lot of the guys that are in the Firecracker 400, I'd be interested to know their date of birth and whether they were even alive in 1987. I feel like that the more you as a fan or me as a fan learn about the history of the sport, the more invested, rooted I am in the present. And when I go to a race, I know how far this sport's came to get to this point, to be able to experience what I'm experiencing now. And so, the more people can learn about the past, I think the better it'll make their experiences today. And I think too, I'm just assuming if I'm a customer of iRacing and I'm driving this car and I hear this story about all the people that have been influencing the way this car drives, I have more confidence in what I'm feeling, sensing, experiencing, and it gives me a real idea of what those guys in 1987 were dealing with, and how those cars drove, and how challenging those conditions might have been. But yeah, I think in the perfect world, we'd have various eras of NASCAR stock cars for all these people to drive and feel and experience. It's cars from the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, and we'd have all these people that were involved in sport influencing what those cars feel like on the surface. But iRacing simulators, console games, all those are a big key to connecting NASCAR to the youth and the fan, the new fan that we're going to create, that's going to be a fan for decades as they develop into a grown up and have a family of their own and introduce their kids to the sport. It all starts at a very young age, and what are those people spending most of their time doing? They're on that simulator. If they're a race fan, they're on iRacing, they're on a console, and that's an easy place to go create new fans, because they're motorsports fans already. They enjoy what they're doing on iRacing.